Let's move this. I don't like that being in the frame, but it's probably in the frame a lot. Chapter 2. Pleasant slumber unhindered by anxiety abruptly ended to the click of Kylene's biological alarm clock, ringing right on cue with summer's dawn, trained to autonomy like her entire morning routine. She groaned and stretched, yet didn't quite open her eyes as she snuggled her hugged blanket, sneaking in a tad more groggy rest before springing from bed to begin the daily grind. James busily preparing his own breakfast while waiting on Kylene's mumbled order. Eggs, please. Modus operandi had been consistent for years with few deviations, yet deathly silence answered Kylene's request, a chilling change which blasted her heart with freezing terror. Only then did ears molded by routine notice home's emptiness. "Father?" she loudly gasped, bolting upright in bed. James's age had long been of concern. Anguish of heart and mind feared the worst as quivering eyes jolted at his bed. Rattled breathing vocalized the horror plastered on her face in place of failed words when, for a moment, she swore someone lay beneath James's quilt, a figure resembling a corpse. Grievous tears already began swelling eye sockets before seeing through the paranoid illusion a split second later. Respiration eased, and eyes turned away, shutting to oust lingering despair with a sigh. One hand pressed against her racing heart, the other on her stomach, both twisted organs sickened with dread. A hard gulp subjugated a choking, thick throat lump, and finally nerves found calm. Once capable of thinking straight, Kylene surveyed the all-purpose room. Where was he if not making breakfast? Confusion shortly spotted a small note on the dining table, asking that she spend her morning doing any final preparations while he handles the daily chores. Relieved beyond words, Kylene followed James' advice, starting by hanging up her robe so carelessly discarded last night. She gently slung the garment onto a wall hook located between the front door and its right side window. With yesterday's other clothes in tow for the hamper, including all undergarments safely removed since nobody was around to see, Kylene adjourned upstairs to don an appropriate outfit for the day ahead. While her bra met standard design, her panties were specialized with tails in mind, sporting a slit easily and comfortably accessible to the appendage via latching waistband. Hers used a button, but zipper, hook, and Velcro variants also existed. Lace versions were also available in stores long ago, but, outside of custom orders, were discontinued by unpopularity in most regions because of being often considered nettlesome to securely tie behind one's back. For outer clothes, she slipped into a spandex dark purple tank top with a matching pleated miniskirt. Neither considered as normal wizard attire, but comfort and maneuverability decidedly took precedence over social suitability. Ironically, a loosely fitted black poncho, draping about half her torso height, failed to entertain either preference by fancily providing her with pockets. The leather sheaths held a dagger at either shoulder, and 3 more empty pockets lined the back for carrying small items. Despite its unintentionally revealing nature, the getup fell short of flattering. Aside from a lean figure resultant from the exercise of manual labor, Kylene did nothing for tending to her appearance, letting her fur be matted with clinging patches of filth, her odor characteristic of sweat and dirt. Given the isolation and toil of residents living in Cultivator's Xanadu, the mentality of putting little value in obsessive cleanliness was not entirely uncommon, although those who felt that way were in the minority. After getting dressed, Kylene returned last night's study materials to their rightful places on the shelves, then fixed herself a hearty breakfast not requiring of cooking. Even had she not preferred to conserve her energy for today's test, they didn't own any appliances for mechanically converting spirit magic into heat for cooking. Only her father could prepare food in that manner without kindling. James wouldn't return from farming chores for quite a while. Morning was still young, and even with cooperation the work usually dragged into early afternoon. If not for expeditious magic used for cultivation and preservation, the job would take until dusk. Agricultural spells comprised Kylene's earliest memories of exposure to her beloved art. Kylene decided it best she spend that free time meditating, readying mentally and emotionally for the upcoming tests, whatever they may be, while simultaneously suppressing creeping impatience. Relaxed posture sat cross-legged, shifting until perfectly comfortable. Eyes closed alongside the first deep breath, and regulating rhythmic breathing happened almost instantly. Achieving crystalline serenity took a fair bit longer. Peskily anxious curiosities concerning the mysterious trial persistently crept to mind, frequently requiring resolute pushes to terminate consciousness. Every breath burrowed calmness deeper, however, its tightening grasp slowly wringing out all 5 senses one droplet at a time. The universe soon receded into a timeless void of black nothingness besides her inner self, so absolutely as to defy the fundamental cerebral functionality of a half-breed like Kylene. Thicker animal bloodlines empowered instincts to outdo free will, regularly triggering uncontrollable reactions to simple distractions and stimulants. Advantageous in some activities, but not when undertaking the uninterrupted mental control of a wizard's training. An allegedly unbeatable weakness the young vixen ambitiously overcame to reach her prestigious point. Hours later, the front door's hinges creaked open, and in walked the soiled graybeard in farming attire. Kylene still sat deep in meditation. No doubt she'd demand beginning forthwith, so James withheld waking her until after getting himself cleaned up, changed, and grabbing a quick bite. Wearing his favorite robe with hygiene presentably optimized, James snapped Kylene's concentration by inducing a magic tick that sparked in the depth of her subconscious. Deprived senses abruptly welcomed earthly awareness, overwhelmingly reintroduced to their host. Breezing farmland scents invaded odorless breathing, additionally revitalizing taste buds. Silence surrendered to the world's peaceful song. Nerves suddenly registered intangible floor planks, spreading physical stimulation of the entire body. Light brightly pierced darkness against dilated eyes. The fading trance returned unto Kylene existence outside herself. Pleasantly surprised by Kylene's decision, James smiled underneath his thick, white mustache and beard, both long and expertly groomed. A rudimentary enchantment repelled mess when eating and working, causing undesirables to cleanly drizzle off. Unlike his daughter, the man took pride in his abundant whiskers and cared for them accordingly. "Are you back?" he asked softly. Receiving a responsive nod, he said in a more standard tone, "Good," while straightening up. "Then follow me." Without another word, James moved to wait in the doorway for his daughter's bearings to wholly return. Then together they departed for an empty lay, a fenced-in place James kept reserved as a training environment at the farthest corner of their property. James preferred training there and wished his daughter would agree, opting for personally owned land instead of public property. Because nobody outspokenly objected, Kylene favored the pond. In her opinion, water's applicability surpassed grass. Impacts upon it by magic could be more clearly measured, and damage less was infinitely more fleeting. They stared at each other for several nerve-wracking minutes, a common practice of testing patience that Kylene sometimes swore he did just to mess with her, during which neither uttered a word. The only sounds allowed were those of gentle wind undulating grass and leaves, carrying with it the chirping of birds and, when loud enough to reach, the noises of distant farming activity. Auditory sensations accompanied by an array of rustic scents, some which would be considered offensive to the nose of people not accustomed to rural living. Until at last James announced it was time to begin, words that Kylene stifled a relieved sigh to hearing. Best she maintain a professional demeanor to keep the evaluation tilted in her favor. James elevated his arm sideways by 45 degrees with fingers spread, palms forward. Magic energies, multitudes superior to his pupils, yet still casual for himself, issued from his mana heart to 5 precise points along the length of either limb. Each point materialized a pearly effulgent disc, plus an 11th which emerged from his chest and rose overhead. They hovered around him, controlled like marionettes bound to his will by invisible, untouchable threads of magic. Confused dissatisfaction frowned. At a glance, that looked very elementary for conducting an important evaluation. What could a regular exercise possibly prove that he didn't already know? That obvious disappointment brought a smirk to the old man's face. "Do not approach this evaluation with expectations of what it seems. This spell may have been originally designed to improve cognizance, reactivity, speed, and precision, but that was when its intent was to educate, not test. Now that its purpose has been restructured, you cannot hope to defeat it by anticipating its past incarnation." Somewhere deep down, Kylene heard what James was saying, but outwardly she could only mock him for that pitiful attempt at obstructing her visit to the first elemental domain. "Unbelievable," she sighed to herself, audibly accusing. "In other words, devising an appropriate test backfired, so you resorted to breathing new life into something rudimentary with an uninspired excuse." James lost his smirk. "Your impudence is a dagger awaiting the perfect opportunity to slit your throat. Dare to have at me armed with that foolish overconfidence, and behold the ultimate truth of how unqualified you really are. Tch, whatever. Kylene stepped back a few paces, to the exercise's customary distance, then arrogantly fired an energy bolt from her right palm like a bullet, making sure that even if her aim were horribly off, the projectile lacked the firepower to harm James. It would suffice in shattering the purposely fragile disc hovering above the man's head no less for that precaution. As always, the first shot missed, the disc teasingly dodging at the last second by streaking skyward like a shooting star. Immediately following suit, the others began zipping about like a coordinated swarm of insects. Briefly observing their patterns, Kylene fired again with actual confidence that she'd hit, but the target didn't simply evade. Unlike any past exercise, it shockingly quadruplicated into proportionately smaller units, which safely dispersed with multiplied quickness. What? You have only your own presumptuous attitude to blame for your shortcomings, James replied. A pompousness that will be your downfall. Their speed accelerated until eyesight could no longer differentiate heads from tails, zipping around like miniature comets. Damn it! Momentary loss of composure rapidly hurled 3 slapdash shots, all widely missing their mark. Restraint caught herself when revving up a 4th. Wildly attacking wouldn't work. Undoubtedly, James would harshly criticize inefficacy and rash behavior. Regardless of that grading criteria, mad shots were useless versus such staggeringly nimble adversaries. She couldn't do a thing without first calming down and intelligently playing her cards. Eyes closed to focus on calming down, while sharpening her other senses. Although eyesight wasn't terrible, tuning her stronger modalities could boast superior reliability. Upon realizing that potential ages ago, James encouraged treating those vulpecular characteristics as invaluable assets, and frequently incorporated harnessing them into lessons even preceding wizardry training. Adhering to that advice, she not only learned how to divert mental processing into enhancing other senses in compensation of ceased sight, but eventually also how to further broaden hearing and vibrise range and sensitivity through the application of magic, transcending herself to a heightened state of awareness. As a youngster, she called it Super Fox Mode, which sounded cool back then, but nowadays embarrassment avoided mentioning that abandoned name. Even when inquired specifically, distressful reluctance tried to circumvent answering without lying. Sometimes James still teasingly brought it up because he thought it cute back then, in which events Kylene's shame nearly felt fatal. Silly names aside, that ability evoked unrivaled acuteness, surpassing the combined potency of eyesight supported by other weakened senses. Scent didn't help with the immediate situation, but pointy ears and long whiskers immune to optical trickery pinpointed every movement like radars. Magic readied in both hands. Vibrations tickled concentrated senses, triggering an instinctive twitch which hurled a bullet directly at one of the original discs. Expecting the resulting dispersal, her still loaded hand followed through post-haste. Hitting its mark, one of the 4 miniatures dissipated completely. The procedure repeated. Developing a feel for it during the first, the next attempt played out quicker and smoother. Destroyed were 2 of the smaller discs, scraped by the edges of her second shot. Suddenly, Kylene was lost in mute darkness, hypersenses detecting nada from unnatural sources. Her face evinced frustration over what happened, but refused to confront the truth with open eyes. The discs had halted, their last whereabouts disguised under the vibrational cover of those destroyed. She had a rough idea of where a couple might have parked, but that was it. Purely by his best estimate, James tactfully spoke with consideration of his daughter's amplified hearing. The key to victory often lies in knowing yourself and your enemy. Tell me, how do you defeat an opponent who securely dangles that distinct advantage over your head? If you can't provide an answer, you'll never succeed. Testing continued for a little over an hour, during which time Kylene employed several cunning tactics and tricks, against which James had a puzzling answer for each to keep her on her toes. Disc behavior started acting sporadically aggressive halfway through, aggravatingly assaulting with quick passes. Blows didn't hurt, but grading necessitating dodging. Time expired, verbally announced by James alongside the vanishing of undefeated targets. Every original disc had been split, but approximately half the miniatures still remained. Annoyance overtook Kylene. Time's up? What do you mean, time's up? You never mentioned a time limit. Likely she would have stomped to him, perhaps flailing in frustration, had she not been so taken aback by the abrupt announcement. The world is not always bound by distinct regulations. One must uphold unerring readiness for the unexpected, lest one's downfall be the result of the unanticipated. Now, hurry and catch your breath. We have more tests to conduct. Skepticism scowled behind her mentor's back. Notwithstanding the reasoning, time expiring as her stride was reaching its pinnacle felt too coincidental, considering the purpose of the tests. She suspected foul play of some sort and made a note to keep eyes henceforth peeled. Sticking to the foundation of retooling familiar sessions, James conjured 5 automated golems from the soil and ordered Kylene to fight under stipulation of magic's forbiddance. A basic challenge on any other day. Excellent agility and adroit swordplay easily dodged and parried their clunky attacks. Like the previous test, alterations and grading criteria increased the difficulty. The golems were swifter than usual and hastened as fighting progressed. Tactics also gradually improved, evolving from striking individually to performing coordinated attacks. Learning from mistakes and by analyzing Kylene's strengths and weaknesses, defenses also surpassed typical durability, nullifying cuts and kicks that would normally inflict at least some abrasion. Adapting to their movements, Kylene likewise meliorated. Alas, their numbers and raw strength eventually overwhelmed her. Before she knew it, she was fighting at her unrestrained limit, until she wound up secured, prostrated, and pinned, unable to move so much as her tail. Complaints argued unfairness, whereupon James confessed that outcome's inevitability. The golems were designed to be unbeatable under the enforced rules. Rather than be concerned about whether or not she won, he was instead grading her adaptability and longevity of the fight. The final test relocated to a designated field which James had spent much of yesterday afternoon preparing. Approximately 300 square feet of flat grass within a makeshift fence of pegs and ropes elevated at about 1 and 2 feet. There he'd test Kylene on scavenging under dire circumstances. 'Twas part of why it was saved for last, to ensure enervation from those prior and better stimulate desperation. Forests leading into the foothills of the surrounding mountain range would have been preferable, but reaching them would take too long. James therefore arranged a mock area, not very accurate real-world conditions, but hopefully sufficient for gauging his daughter's general ability. Compensation for unsatisfactory conditions blindfolded Kylene beforehand, forcing a reliance on olfactory navigation to somewhat emulate hunting throughout a vast unknown region. Matter of course, artificial complications interfered for measuring Kylene against unfair odds. Most sought items were partially buried to mask their scents or concealed by distracting odors. Wind manipulating magic also kept shifting the breeze, allowing only short whiffs or causing trails to guide their pursuer into the border. Haplessly bumping the fence for a third time, Kylene's blood boiled. Tremendous willpower resisted tearing off her blindfold and stomping at her teacher in yelling fury. Strength found by knowing his game, even though that knowledge, in a way, fueled the fire more. She took a few calming breaths, acknowledging that no good would result from acting out. "The forces of nature are unpredictable," he would say, or something to that effect. "That includes the wind, which can shift its heading at a moment's notice, taking all sense away with it. My interference is thus to challenge you with the worst-case scenario, wherein the wind plays tricks on your senses." Nevertheless, realistic wind patterns weren't so intricately deceptive, looping outside the boundary, then redirecting her way to lead towards nothing, and other such nettlesome nonsense. Otherwise, Kylene's keen nose would indubitably distinguish between misleading and legitimate trails. "Differentiating deceit from truth against impossibility shall further prove your ability to handle more realistic conditions unquestionably," summed up what she predicted would be his unreasonable response should that point be raised. Overcoming the challenge required profounder concentration than realistically necessary. That was the point. To measure capacity for surmounting the worst natural conditions by testing efficiency in handling exaggerated obstacles. In order to pass, she needed to play smarter. As a pureblood, James lacked superhuman senses. No way he could track the subtlest aromas. His deceiving manipulations of the wind were a tapestry of guesswork, theoretically leaving lingering traces of sense accidentally unaffected, assuming Kylene grasped pure-blooded limitations as well as she thought. Settled down, Kylene walked several paces from the fence, her nose raised to the air, inhaling several analytic sniffs for careful assessment, collecting samples from dozens of distinct converging scents. A myriad blend of nature's assorted bounty, swaying grass and trees in the soil which sustained them, faintness of distant farmhands and livestock, deliciously fresh fruits and vegetables, and everything else in between, all of which Kylene's keen modality could pick and individualize from the air's interwoven hodgepodge. Scrutiny noticed some hitting olfactory glands slightly harder than others, labeling them for omission. They felt unnatural, as though moving deliberately, rather than softly flowing with wind's current. Instead, she focused on tracking one of the more subtle scents that's potency seemed nearby. Slow movement accounted for the wisdom of the field's boundary, her mind having been sketching a mental map of the fence's circumference the entire time. That information helped guide her, hinting if the trailed scent stretched beyond the borderline, it remained within bounds. Kylene knelt to physically inspect its source. The apple-like aroma exuded from a half-buried, round object. Proximate dirt, soft and exposed around the rim, implied recent planting. Canine claws dug it out for closer inspection, first by smelling once more, adjacency zoning out nearly all other incoming scents for guaranteed identification. Concluding it indeed smelled of an apple, a cautious confirmation bite was in order. Juicy flavor and distinctive crunch authenticated it absolutely. That's one down. Light digging deepened the small hole to completely bury the pome. Exposed innards multiplied the succulent fruit's scent, and she didn't need more distractions. Adeptness at recognizing deception progressively improved. Bumping the fence still happened occasionally, but more often than not she realized the fallacy of misleading scents prior to collision. Fence-to-item ratio favorably tilted. Ultimately, those improvements did little to ease the process. More isolated items meant less for James to sabotage, granting greater control over a larger percentage of what remained. When down to 3 targets, progress devolved to impractical. The final trial ended as evening settled in. Kylene needed only locate one more item, but James was too capable of altering the airflow at that stage. The only viable solution would have been to systematically crawl and feel across the area, which James would undoubtedly frown upon. Unlike the other tests, Kylene walked away satisfied with the results. Upon returning home, lying suggested they first eat dinner for time to ponder the results. As Kylene silently suspected, James's decision was already final, and he was just opting to further test his pupil's patience. Regardless, both were legitimately hungry after such a long day, the old man especially famished from constant magic usage. Between completing all the farming chores solo to the arduousness of ceaseless magic during hours of evaluation, James had worked extra hard that day. Kylene's considerate gratitude prepared their sizable meal while he enjoyed some well-deserved rest. She even ensured that he received bigger portions than her own. They ate in silence, both deeply occupied by their own mentations. As per usual leading into any sort of wizardry lesson or lecture, they formally hunkered on the floor. Kylene still wearing her scanty outfit, while James had changed into pajamas. After such a long, tiresome day, he was eager to retire to dreamland, so dispensed with his typically prolonged suspense, cutting straight to the nitty-gritty soon as they were both comfortably seated. Kylene, my daughter, today your extraordinary excellence trampled my expectations, shining remarkably with expertise belying your years. I admit to underestimating how well you'd perform in advance. However, I still honestly disbelieve you're ready to challenge the elementals. But father, Kylene objected with a calm disposition, struggling to maintain composure, what qualifications could you have possibly ascertained by tasking me with those impossible tests? Agitation verbally emerged here and there, but suppressed before becoming too excited. James lowered his gaze, eyes closed in thoughtful contemplation. Words required very careful selection, lest Kylene weaponize them. She would pounce at any chance to justify arguing his decision. When Papa Bray reopened, his green irises were gleaming with the intensity of aged wisdom. Listen well, my child. Collectively, today's tests simulated the ordeal of facing an elemental. You have only your ineligibility to blame for perceiving them as impossible. Had you the qualifications to advance your training, there would be no need for such excuses. Just because I didn't flawlessly pass an imitation doesn't necessarily mean I can't handle the real thing. I'm good at getting out of tight spots, and fighting an individual opponent in real combat differs significantly from battling under the administration of restrictive rules. Your misguided argument's validity requires that you battled a foe elemental, when in reality individual assets were graded against theirs under manageable conditions. The first test assessed magical capabilities by grading power, technique, utilization, and stamina. You displayed incredible technique and stamina, and utilization excellently improved circumstantially. However, your power unacceptably lacked, therefore you failed. The second— Now hold on, Kylene interrupted, accidentally raising her voice. I failed by falling short on only one of 4 criteria? His pupil's outburst didn't faze the elderly wizard. Without all 4, overcoming an elemental is impossible. In this particular case, wielding unrivaled talent and endurance won't accomplish anything if your spells don't pack enough punch to harm your opponent. Insufficient power means that skill and vitality only prolong failure. Questionable technique or utilization result in wasted efforts, and executions too poor for strengths to compensate. Without unrelenting stamina, energy depletes sooner than your foe falls. Each of these 4 traits are integral to the whole. Subtract 1, and the rest crumble alongside it. Forbearance to retort belied Kylene's furrowed snout. James asked if he may continue, speaking so politely as if to be mocking her and receiving a disgruntled nod in return. Secondly, your physical capabilities were evaluated. Like the magic test, stamina and endurance proved incredible, as did commendable adaptability. However, also similarly, certain vital aspects were seriously flawed. Most notably, your combat style remains too aggressive. As I've said many times, a wizard's fighting style should emphasize defense to create openings for casting magic, not rely on raw swordplay, especially when fighting opponents of superior power. Even though I forbade magic, a properly disciplined method would have retained defensive priority. Instead, you were blinded by the need to draw blood and despondently attacked despite impotence. Finally, your scavenging abilities were tested. As you know, most wizards set off into the world as a graduate shortly after earning 1 pact. Adversities can be many during any journey, especially pertaining to rations. I wanted to ensure you can scrounge for necessities in even the most unruly conditions. You didn't succeed with flying colors, but performed more than well enough to manage under realistic conditions. It's the only trial I bestow you a full pass. However, that pass is strictly related to what comes after, and has no bearing on your qualifications to challenge the elementals. I'm sorry, but for your own sake I must deny permission to meet them. Perhaps in another year or 2, when your skills are a little more refined. James stood with a grunt. Do not be discouraged by today's shortcomings. Average wizards not only begin their schooling at a younger age, but don't dare meet an elemental until their early 20s. Rather than sulk over this minor failure, be proud of what you've achieved in such a short period, and learn from today's experiences to develop even more positively hereafter. Despite being reasonably grounded in truth, those words of solace only fueled the rebellious desideratum. Wishes to youthfully relish magic disdained the prospect of rigorous, lifelong training. Kylene's goal aimed to master wizardry at a prime age, then delightfully spread its magnificent wonder across the globe, not dedicate her entire life to training, only to finally perfect the art when too decrepit to enjoy it. Even at his eld, James meditated to further develop whenever time allowed. Kylene believed, what good is a talent you'll never perfect until it's too late to use, and refused to concede to that unacceptable hurdle. Instead, she strove to unrealistically push herself. Recalcitrant accordance had no intention of abiding to Father's order to hamper that personally plotted course. Before dawn, Kylene awoke to depart unnoticed. She loaded up a sack with food, planning to eat breakfast after safely gaining untraceable distance from home. Dressed in yesterday's attire, plus the rations tied over her shoulders, she returned downstairs and cautiously tiptoed to the nearest window. Their size and elevation, plus her athleticism, made silently slipping outside a cinch despite a mere 4'5" stature, another result of her heritage. Half-breeds who were more human usually grew to average human heights, for better or worse. Those with thicker animal blood were often shorter or taller depending on their animal side. The red fox being small by canine standards was thus reflected by Kylene's growth. Outside, she dashed northward, bound for the local domain of fire elemental Hitza. Over 60 minutes after Kylene's sneaky escape, a mighty fist thunderously banged the front door, its powerful impacts practically rattling the entire cabin. James awoke to the noise, but not until another pounding did its cause occur to him. Visitors were rare, even during sensible hours. His mind needed a moment to register what was going on. Upon piecing it together, he groaned for Kylene to answer the door. When she didn't respond, he rolled to notice her suspicious absence. "Just a minute," he tiredly hollered when whosoever was knocking delivered a third set of slams. Slowly he stood, tossed on his robe from the wall hook on his side of the cabin, then answered the call. Seeing the unexpected guests lit his groggy eyes with exuberance, matched only by a delighted smile accurately expressing an upbeat heart. "Well, this is a pleasant surprise. Please, come inside." Thus concludes Chapter 2. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed what you saw, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you would like to support me and this channel, then consider heading over to Amazon.com to perhaps purchase the book that we previewed today. Or if you're still uncertain, then look forward to the next chapter.